Russian reversal. So right now, Japan's also in Singapore doing negotiations with Russia, and every time this happens, we keep hearing the expectations that Japan is going to sign a peace treaty with Russia. And people say, well, why does Japan need a peace treaty with Russia? Japan's not been at war with Russia for 50 years, and even back during World War II, Japan was only officially at war with Russia for like a week. Russia only declared war after the A-bombs had been dropped, I believe. There was only for like a few days, and Russia just made basically an opportunistic land grab. I mean, they did. No, that's not actually true. They did fight the Japanese in Manchuria. One of the biggest tank battle in history actually happened in Manchuria. No one learns about it, but it was so there was significant fighting in Siberia between Japan and Russia during World War II. But basically, at the end of the war, they basically did a big land grab, and they grabbed Sakhalin Island, which Japan was okay giving up because they sort of grabbed that, half of it after the Russo-Japanese War. But they also grabbed basically the Kuril Islands, and not just the Kuril Islands that they had, that Russia had before the war, but all the Kuril Islands down to Hokkaido, basically protecting the Sea of Okhotsk, basically from not giving, from being able to shut out anybody, including the US or Japan, from having access to the Sea of Okhotsk north of Japan. So they grabbed these 4 islands that had always been Japanese right until World War II. And from their perspective, they, finders keepers, we won, you lost, we conquered this is our land. And they immediately kicked out the Japanese residents of those islands. These were inhabited islands. They deported them to Siberia. Some of them stayed in Siberian labor camps for 20 years before they were allowed to come back to Japan, and they set up basically a refugee community in Nemuro, which is basically where they can see these 4 islands where they used to live. And bear in mind, this is not the whole Kuril Island chain. This is just the 4 islands closest to Hokkaido. But Russia wants, for security reasons, all of those islands basically under their control, so that no one can blockade them or obstruct their Pacific access from there. Basically, after they deported all of the residents from these islands, they took deportees from within Russia. That Stalin was always moving people around. He took Germans and people from the Ukraine, partisans, people like that, and he dropped them basically on these islands in the homes of these Japanese people, and they've basically been occupied. These towns on these islands have been occupied ever since, and they've built military facilities, they've been doing gas exploration. And the thing is, while Japan was okay with giving up Taiwan, Korea, Sakhalin, all these other territories that it incorporated into Japan itself during and before the war, Japan's adamant that it never conceded to giving up those 4 islands. I mean, those 4 islands were not stolen territory. Those have always been part of Japan, and people lived in them, and those residents want to go home. So the reason that Japan and Russia have never made a peace treaty since World War II is Japan has consistently refused to do a peace treaty with Russia unless something is done about those islands, about giving them back. And they came really close to a deal, I think, in the 60s with Brezhnev, where Brezhnev agreed that basically he wanted to set up ties with Japan. Russia has a lot of natural gas and so on. There's reasons that Japan might want to do a deal with Russia as well. So he had this idea that they were going to give back 2 islands, and then they'd do a peace treaty and have diplomatic relations, and then after that they would negotiate the final status of the remaining 2 islands. And that solution looked like it was going to get done until Brezhnev was basically ousted, and the idea was dumped. And ever since then, Japan sort of said, well, we had a deal in writing that we were going to do this 2+2 deal, which Japan's used as the baseline for negotiations with Russia ever since. And every time Japan goes to talk with Russia, they say, this is the year, we're going to get those islands back for you, everybody, and we're not going to give Russia a cent. And they haven't given Russia a cent. All the countries that lost money in Russia when Russia democratized, from it all going to the oligarchs and gangsters, Japan didn't lose any money because, a bit like the abductee Russia issue with North Korea, they had the island issue with Russia, so they've never actually engaged with Russia or sort of ended the war situation with them, which is ridiculous. There was optimism with Putin because he is a martial artist. I think he does judo or aikido or something like that. He's like Aikido dogs. He's a fan of Japan, and people have have pointed out similarities between him and Abe. They're kind of democratically elected, sort of strong leaders, is one perception. So there's always been this hope that under Abe there would be and particularly under a leader as strong as Putin, who basically is immune to criticism almost within Russia, that he's a guy who might be able to finally resolve the sovereignty issue, give some of these islands back to Japan, and that Japan can then establish a whole bunch of new deals and so on with Russia. So Japan keeps basically hoping and announcing, we're going to these negotiations and now we think we're going to get the islands back. The problem is that the Russians on the other side, they're basically a nationalist government, and whether it's posturing as a negotiation tactic or whether they're sincere. Japan showed up in Singapore, as they always do, saying, we would like to discuss the return of the northeast territories of Japan, and how we're going to integrate that into a comprehensive peace plan with Russia that we're here to negotiate. And every time the Russian foreign ministry and government has responded, basically where Japan's gone into these negotiations expecting to negotiate the return of these islands, and every time Russia's come in saying they're expecting to negotiate the Japan concession of these islands forever. So they've shown up and they've basically Russian reversed the Japanese. They've said that you will promise you will stop making claims of sovereignty, you will stop calling them the northeast territories, you'll call them the Kuril Islands. And they've basically shown up making a whole bunch of demands of the Japanese that they just give up. Which I find kind of funny, because I like Russian reversal jokes, and I find that basically every negotiation between Japan and Russia turns into a Russian reversal situation. It shows, as with China and with Russia, that in spite of the economic likely benefits of setting up economic ties with Japan, nationalism on a few crappy rocks matters more, in spite of the fact that this is clearly a situation like in other parts of the world where this is, unlike the other island disputes of Takeshima with Korea and the Senkaku Islands with China, those are just crappy rocks, uninhabited rocks that honestly no one really cares about other than the fishing rights and the gas and so on. The southern Kuril Islands, the northeast territories of Japan, these were inhabited. The people who lived in these towns and who still have the deeds, the houses and the towns on these islands still live in Nemuro, and they can see their old houses. Under certain deals they were allowed to even go visit. So this is a more challenging issue in some ways because those people can vote. They've got a strong lobby in Hokkaido. And it's one where, the position of the Japanese government is that this is an unacknowledged, unrecognized occupation of Japanese territory that's continued for a long time. So, yeah, the hope is, that Japan can get these islands, can do some sort of a deal with Russia to be good for both countries, but there again, that'd put Japan in an awkward spot with America, as would a deal with North Korea, which is also possible at some point. So it looks like a bit like the negotiations with South Korea. Japan's entered with all this optimism. Abe's made it a goal of his tenure to try to get at least some of these islands back, but it looks like nothing's going to happen.